Welcome to Democracy in Action, insights and discussion about some of the most talked about topics with the Fulcrum's collaborators. Consistent with the Fulcrum's mission, this program strives to share many perspectives to widen our audience's viewpoints. I'm Hugo Balta, Executive Editor of the Fulcrum and your host. Today we are joined by Leslie Virnelson, Democracy Fellow with Interfaith America, Robert Cropf, a Professor of Political Science in St. Louis University, and Payal Sinha, a distinguished attorney who serves as the Director of Strategic Partnerships and Community Engagement at the Tahrirh Justice Center. Payal, Robert, Leslie, thank you so very much for joining us. So I'm going to start with Bob. In your column, Why Harvard's Fight is Everyone's, you wrote, "This is not just a fight over campus politics, it's a battle over the future of democratic governance, over who defines truth, who controls knowledge, and who prepares the next generation of civic leaders." Tell us about that and your article.
Thank you, Hugo, and it's great to be a part of this important conversation today. In my article, I argued that what's happening isn't just campus controversy. It's a much bigger battle about who defines truth, who controls knowledge, and ultimately, as you said, who prepares the next generation of civic leaders. For decades, universities have been places where free inquiry and open criticism could flourish. But today, the essential character, what the historian Richard Hofstadter called the center of inquiry and criticism, is under direct political assault. When Harvard President Alan Garber rejected the Trump administration's outrageous demands for faculty pledges, ideological shifts, and dismantling DEI programs, he wasn't just defending Harvard. He was defending the idea that universities must remain independent from political control. The administration's immediate retaliation, freezing $2.2 billion in federal funding to Harvard, is a sharp escalation designed to intimidate not just one school, but all of higher education. It shows that this is not about reform. It's about conquest. And Harvard's resistance stands in stark contrast to institutions like Columbia University, and even powerful law firms like Paul Weiss, who chose appeasement instead of standing their ground. Columbia's experience shows that giving in doesn't protect you. It just invites more demands. What's at stake here is bigger than any one university. If major institutions surrender to political intimidation, they create a model of compliance that will ripple across our democracy. We know from history that authoritarian regimes don't just silence dissent, they rewrite the curriculum. They redefine what counts as truth, or at least they attempt to. If we lose independent centers of knowledge, we lose the ability to sustain a functioning democracy. So I'd just like to close by saying that Harvard's stand is a rallying cry, not a victory lap. Resistance will be costly, legally, politically, and financially. But I'm afraid that the cost of surrender is far greater: the erosion of academic freedom and the collapse of democratic norms. Because if institutions with this much power won't defend democracy, who will?
Thank you, Robert, for that very thoughtful answer. And, what we've seen a lot in the first 100 days of the Trump administration has just been an incessant attack on so many different institutions, so many different communities. One of them has been the immigrant community. And Payal, I want to continue the conversation with you. In the column, "New Law Will Likely Harm Immigrant Survivors of Domestic Violence," you wrote, "A tragic death sparked national attention, turning it into a call to strengthen immigration enforcement to enhance public safety." the Laken-Riley Act emerged in the ongoing debate over immigration policy in the U.S. You say it purports to provide protection from crime, but in fact could have an especially negative impact on survivors of domestic and sexual violence. Tell us why and tell us more about your column.
Thank you so much. I want to start by saying that, the Laken-Riley Act, just a little bit of background on that. We talk about this tragic death, and this tragic death is unfortunately of a 22-year-old nursing student murdered in 2024 by an undocumented immigrant with a prior theft-related offense. And then this law came about, which now mandates detention of undocumented immigrants charged with specific crimes, which includes theft, burglary, assaulting a law enforcement official, and offenses resulting in death or serious bodily injury. It has an impact on immigrant community because under this bill, immigration authority would be required to take a person into immigration custody after a theft-related arrest. It's not a conviction, it's an arrest. Even if the criminal judge found them to present no risk and even release them on bail. The person would then be stuck in immigration detention with no ability to request a release, even to attend their own criminal court hearing pending underlying charges. So this also adds a burden on the prosecutors, which already face significant challenges in getting people transported from immigrant custody to criminal court for ongoing proceedings. But besides that, in practicality, how would this work? Right? This means the bill would require the government to detain an undocumented mother arrested on the charges of shoplifting a diaper or a baby food when they are in that domestic violence relationship where the dependency on the perpetrator or the abuser is so much that they don't even have any financial independence to be able to take care of themselves for basic needs or for their child. And those mothers will be left without a bond hearing for a duration of their entire deportation proceeding, which could take years when they are even merely arrested, right? And not only does the Laken-Riley Act provide no protections under these circumstances, they don't even have exemptions for minor children or victim of human trafficking, when we know that under human trafficking cases, there is an array of range of things for a person which they could be arrested for because they are being held in duress to do and commit such crime. It's not, in their free will, right? It's the crime committed out of force and desperation, and which could result in ultimately minor child being held in facilities only meant for adults and punish women who are trafficked from suffering abuses. I mean, I have a lot of facts, and one of the things that I just wanted to highlight that studies have indicated that 30 to 50% of immigrant women in US experience domestic violence, which is a rate higher than general population, and about 10 million individuals experience domestic violence in the US, equating to 20 people per minute. And one of the biggest reasons why people don't want to go and report domestic violence to law enforcement, a poll we did in 2017, out of which 80% of the people, immigrant victims, were afraid to report the abuse due to the fear of being deported. And this act is basically stating that that's what is going to happen, because it requires mandated detention based on charges. And we have seen time and again in domestic violence cases that one of the tool that abusers or perpetrators use time and again is making false reports, right? And time and again to have the domestic violence survivor being kept in that relationship is the threat that I'm going to take away the child from you. Nobody is going to hear you out because you're not a US citizen. And now they have this tool that if you don't do what I say, I will call ICE on you, and there is this threat of deportation.
I think you're right. I think that the devil's in the details. Too often we hear from politicians, both Democratic and Republicans, talk about communities like immigrants as a monolith, one, and then also just as a statistic, and not really taking a look at communities within the community and some of the harmful impact that's happening with these just quick broad strokes in regards to looking to affect change. I want to turn now to Leslie and talk about another community within the Latino community. Of course, one of the largest members of immigrants and including undocumented immigrants. In your article, you write, Christian nationalism at the nexus of Latinos, shifting religious and political preferences. That's the title of the article. You wrote about a study by the Public Religion Research Institute that shows that while support for Christian nationalism in the United States remained relatively steady between 2022 and 2024, Hispanic Protestants were the only group with a dramatic increase in support. That if there is an overarching story about Latinos in politics, Latinas in politics in 2025, it is that they are rapidly changing and conflicted electorate. Tell us more about the study.
Yeah, thank you so much, Hugo. So this study by the Public Religion Research Institute was the 2024 American Values Atlas, and it surveyed how people relate to Christian nationalist viewpoints in depth. And people were classified as adherents, sympathizers, skeptics, or rejectors based on how they reacted to a series of statements about Christian nationalism, like statements like, God has called Christians to exercise dominion over all areas of American society. And something this study found is that support for Christian nationalist viewpoints has been relatively stable since 2022. They found that a majority of Republicans continue either to be adherents, meaning they support most of these sentiments in the study, or sympathizers, meaning they supported some of them. And support also continues to be geographically concentrated in the South and the Midwest. But the big swing and the big change is the number of Hispanic Protestants who are classified as either adherents or sympathizers. There was a 12% increase. And in this study, Hispanic Protestants is the category that they use. But in the US, functionally, this category mostly means Hispanic or Latino, Latina evangelicals and Pentecostals. Those are the Protestant denominations they belong to. So for this article, I talked with two Interfaith America Vote is Sacred fellows to hear their perspectives on Latino and Latina politics and religion in the US. And the Vote is Sacred fellows were a group of national interfaith leaders with a really wide range of political and ideological perspectives who convened to promote peaceful democratic engagement during the 2024 election. So Doctors Erica Ramirez and Eli Valentin are both experts in Latino religion and politics. Dr. Ramirez focuses on the Southwest, while Dr. Valentin focuses on the Northeast. And one of the biggest things they both want to get out there is that Latinos are not a unified voting bloc. So often on the news, they're considered as just one unit or a monolith, but this is, as you've said, a huge and rapidly growing part of our electorate that brings a wide diversity of religious and political perspectives. And so one thing we focused on in this article is questioning a common story that Christian nationalism can be directly equated with white nationalism. Undoubtedly, there's some really clear overlaps between them, but that's not the whole story. Dr. Ramirez, in particular, highlights how very intentionally multi-ethnic church communities might subscribe to a type of Christian nationalism that God has a plan for the US or a plan for Israel or for other countries, and that Christians should maintain political power. But these same church communities might also demonstrate their deep value for racial and ethnic diversity and have really diverse leadership up front every week during services and in positions of decision-making and power in their church communities. So she gives as an example evangelical and Pentecostal Christians who supported Bolsonaro's 2023 insurrection in Brazil because of their belief in God's plan for their country to show that Christian nationalism is not exclusive to the United States. And so she points out that Christian nationalists in the US or Brazil might favor military intervention in Israel, while white nationalists might favor isolationism. And so she wants to draw out how Christian nationalism is not necessarily identical to white nationalism. And Dr. Valentin is a great conversation partner with another angle on this because he points out how even in multi-ethnic or majority Latino churches, there's still been a move to homogenize expressions of worship with mainstream evangelical culture, which is still very driven by white culture. So he would point to the loss of distinctly Latino worship styles like corrito hymns as a way that Latino churches maybe have moved to homogenize with expressions of white evangelical culture. And he also points out that the move towards Christian nationalism is another way that Latino communities in the US might ultimately be aligning with trends that are already present in white Christian Protestantism, where support for Christian nationalism has been the strongest. So between these two scholars, we can see how Hispanic Protestants' Christian nationalism is shaped both by global and national trends. And both Dr. Valentin and Dr. Ramirez are really passionate about helping people understand how Latinos' voting and religious preferences are correlated with their countries of origin, are correlated with the churches that they go to help people see more than just one identifier driving people's political preferences. So if I could reflect, I think one of the big takeaways for me and for an audience at a place like the Fulcrum is to respect this big diversity in Latino religious and political views. And I think that we should get curious about motivations and voting patterns that might not fit into the most common stories we hear about Christian nationalism or about categories like Republican versus Democratic voting patterns. And as I said, Drs. Valentin and Dr. Ramirez both want people to see how religion and country of origin are also really important factors influencing Latinos and Latinas' political viewpoints.
Yeah, I thought that study was very revealing about the diversity within a diverse group, and especially with a community like Hispanic Latinos, that culturally, religion is a very big part of their lives. Any other insights that you could share, beginning with you, Bob?
I think we're in a very perilous time, and unfortunately, I think that what we've seen in the first 100 days is only just beginning. I think that if the administration can see that they can take an inch, they'll be more than willing to try to go for the whole mile. So I think that it's very important now, as I've said in several of my pieces, that resistance begins, and it's important that it's civil society and not just the big institutions. And I think there's a lot of time. The midterms are a year away, and that's going to mark potentially a big change. But there's a lot of work between now and then that has to be accomplished.
I think it's, as you mentioned, Hugo, intention and impact. I think that's what we should keep in mind, and lawmakers should keep in mind when, working on an act or, making a legislation or changing the tonality of what it's meant to create and what it's intended to create. And with that, I want to say that WISE Act has been introduced in the, in the Congress, which talks about centering the safety, dignity, and agency of immigrant survivors who often face impossible choices between staying in harm's way or facing detention and deportation. So my only bit is act now, act fast, and talk to the representatives to make sure that bills like these, the legislations like these, which has been introduced by U.S. Representative Jayapal with others, are actually, there to protect and develop our survivor-centric so that we can actually have an impact, a greater impact with an intention to preserve the safety of vulnerable communities which is at risk.
Something that I think is important to say is that at a moment of increasing polarization, we know that studies continue to show that most Americans do desire unity, even if they don't know how to achieve it. And I would say that activism and bridge building are complementary. People who practice pluralism don't have to choose between pluralism and other forms of democratic engagement. So I would just encourage listeners to hold out hope that it's entirely possible to be a bridge builder in some civic spaces and an activist in others, advocating for progressive or conservative causes that align with your values, and to continue reaching out to people in your communities through service and engagement at the same time that you advocate strenuously for democratic norms and for your own political values.
That's an excellent point and a really wonderful way to end this conversation. And again, everything that you all have shared, I think one of the things that we always ask of our contributors at the Fulcrum is to think about what does the path forward look like, right? If what you're being critical of, what's the flip side of that coin, right? Where if this is wrong, then what does right look like? And to your point, we have to continue to engage and have conversations and feel comfortable at feeling uncomfortable. That's where new ideas live, right? That's when something new is happening. And even when we disagree, there's always room for understanding. Once we get beyond labels like Republican and Democrats, liberal and conservative, we're talking to people that we know, people that are, our neighbors. Leslie, Payal, Bob, you've been very generous with your time. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you all for joining us as well. Visit us at thefulcrum.us and check out their great work. This is Democracy in Action, insights and discussion about some of the most talked about topics with the Fulcrum contributors. Amugo Balta, hasta la próxima.